Well friends, let me tell you a little story about the Stoughton sets, which date from 1840 up to the early 20th century. Why did they have, or why were they given, this stamp? The stamp had two purposes. One, of course, was to show the authentic design from the Jacks of London house, absolutely. Here we see two pieces that have it. I have them here mixed with another one that's much more modern, which is also Stoughton. But anyway, why do they have this stamp? Well, it actually had two functions. One, yes, to prove the authenticity of the design, the sober Stoughton design, of course, but it also had a functional purpose. That is, if you remember how the old coordinate system or, let's say, the descriptive system for recording moves used to work, for example, you would open with king's pawn to fourth, and you always had to describe which flank the piece belonged to, whether it was the king's side or the queen's side, if it was a major piece, and as for the pawns, you could subjectively work out their position from previous moves, but you always had to identify them. Of course, with the bishops, since you always have one on a white square and one on a black square, you already knew which flank they belonged to, but obviously that wasn't the case with the knight and the rooks. So, since they have enough mobility to be able to move freely around the board, you had to identify in the old system. For recording moves where they came from. So, these pieces were the only ones that did need to be identified to know whether they belonged to the king's side or the queen's side, that is, those that didn't have the mark. So, really, that was the main reason as well. The British system, the old notation system, really resisted the arrival of the algebraic system, which is much more practical, because you could easily lose track of, say, this pawn was captured here, then captured again over there, and then again somewhere else. How would you know it came from the king's file? So you had to look back through your moves to see how many captures it made and say, ah, yes, if it then advanced. Another square in this file, it's still the king's pawn, but here it would be king's pawn 7, just to give you an example, but it's still from the king's file. So, in the end, even though it wasn't a very practical system, it did put up a lot of resistance to the Hebrew system, which came about in the around 1920, if I remember correctly, but feel free to correct me, but that was basically it. So, having a set like this not only guarantees the authenticity of the design, but also its practicality. So it's a really lovely set, and another one is coming with 15 years of aging in Vogue. We'll upload it, forgive me, I'm also waiting for a Purple Heart board. Cheers.